There are a lot of anime games out there based off of, well, anime franchises. Dragon Ball Z has bukubles of games. So does the Naruto series. The One Piece series is getting up there too. And Omega Force and Koei Tecmo brought us a kind of Muso-like Attack on Titan game last year. Well, we're going to talk about another Omega Force and Koei Tecmo anime to Muso game today. One that I haven't really talked about here on the channel because there have only been a few video games based on it. And that series is Berserk. So, here is my PlayStation Vita and PlayStation TV review of Berserk in the Band of the Hawk. Berserk in the Band of the Hawk starts right at the beginning of the Berserk series. You follow a lone warrior named Guts, who is a mercenary that kind of just drifts from place to place, not really staying in one spot or having allegiance to one specific army or group, until he is ambushed and basically forced to join this mercenary band called the Band of the Hawk. And then you follow Guts as he is basically their tool of war to use, but slowly works his way up in their ranks and really starts to get to know and become really close to some of them. One thing you need to know about the Berserk storyline is that it is very dark, very nitty-gritty, and very violent. In the Golden Age arc, you really start out with just a typical medieval setting, mercenary groups siding with one army of the war. But once the Golden Age arc comes to a close, everything really kicks off with a very dark fantasy setting. Now that's all I can really say because of obvious spoilers that are involved, but it is very dark and it is very gruesome, I could say. Now as far as how much the game covers, Berserk is a very old series. The first Berserk anime came out in 1997 and the Berserk manga originally started in 1990. The anime series from the 1997, 2016, and the 2017 animes only cover 3 of the 5 arcs from the Berserk series. The game covers 4 of them. We start with the Golden Age arc, the Black Swordsman arc, which hasn't been covered by the anime series at this point, the Conviction arc, and the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc. Basically, the only story arc across the entire saga that the game does not cover is the Fantasia arc, which is still a work in progress for the manga. In other words, there is a ton of story content for you to dive into and take in. Berserk in the Band of the Hawk is a Muso action game. As you're going through each stage of the storyline or one of the other game modes, you're going to be fighting huge hordes of enemies in a Muso-like fashion. While you really won't be doing the whole conquest thing that Dynasty Warriors is known for, it's still got the basic template for a Muso game. When you first go into the game, you're going to have story and other game modes you can go into. You've got story mode, free mode, and endless eclipse mode. Story mode's the only one you can really go into at the start. Free mode will unlock as you play through story mode, and endless eclipse will gradually unlock as you play through story mode. And basically, story mode lets you play through the story. Free mode lets you play through any of the story scenarios as any of the playable characters. And endless eclipse mode will allow you to basically go through a seemingly endless gauntlet of missions, all surrounded by a certain or specific character. Now when you're going through story mode, you basically go between stages and events. Conquering each stage in story mode will unlock events with NPCs, or sometimes with the player characters and NPCs. The events are basically there to kind of expand on the story mythos. Some of the events will kind of forebode or foreshadow into a future story event that hasn't happened yet, or it'll just give you a little bit more character background for some of the characters. Now when you're going into a stage, you're going to have story scenes before and after each stage, and you're going to have little story objectives as you're going through the stage. You'll be placed in a large 3D environment in typical Muso fashion where you can freely roam around on your own, call a horse and ride around on it, and fight hordes and hordes of enemies, and pretty typical Muso stuff. Now the main thing that the game tried to do to not be repetitive is the type of objectives you have. You have a standard Muso map, but you don't do the whole conquest, capture this base, then this base, then this base, then this base, then head to the main base. Your objectives are specific towards a storyline. One mission might have you escorting an NPC and defending them from enemy attack until they get to a safe zone and leave the map, while the next mission might have you heading to a specific arena and fighting a giant boss fight. The game really tried to stick with the storyline and not be too repetitive. Now, there is one type of objective that they didn't really succeed in with that. In a few missions, you have starting objectives where you basically have to fight a certain number of enemies in a closed environment until you can basically survive and move on to the next area or the next mission. These start out like slay 100 enemies, slay 200 enemies, and they weren't bad there. It starts to get bad when you start seeing slay 600 enemies, slay 1,000 enemies. You're basically doing the same thing, but it just keeps dragging on and on and on. It feels like you're spending almost 10 minutes on that one objective. And that's really the only area where repetition really becomes noticeable. As far as combat goes, you've got typical Muso combos where you can use the square button for light attacks and the triangle for heavy attacks, and these can be mixed together to create combos that you will eventually learn as you play through story missions and level up to, well, learn them. And you've also got a couple unique things in here. You've got Frenzy Mode, and you got the Death Blow system. As you fight through enemies, you'll fill up your Frenzy gauge, and once it's filled up, you can tap circle, go into Frenzy Mode, and for a limited time, all of your attacks will be a lot more powerful and will create a lot more guard breaks and knockbacks, which is especially useful against large bosses that have really hard to break guards. And while you're in Frenzy Mode, you'll fill up your Death Blow gauge. When your Death Blow gauge is filled up, you can tap circle to initiate an ultimate attack to do huge damage to any enemies right in front of you. And later on in the game, you also gain the ability to use your Death Blow gauge to do a special transformation. And then once you complete all of your objectives, you complete the mission, you gain items that you can equip, enhance, and combine to basically better your stats for your next mission. And you keep going through this and again and again and again until all the story missions are done and you beat the game. Now, as far as length is concerned, each battle stage should take you, I'd say, an average of 15 to 20 minutes if you play on the normal difficulty. And there are 46 story missions and 59 events for you to experience for the storyline. Now, counting those, as well as the actual story scenes that come with each story mission, I would say you couldn't beat this game in less than 15 to 20 hours. You'd likely be spending a lot more than that unless you went on the easy difficulty the entire time. Now, as far as presentation is concerned, character models are good in visuals. They've got a huge amount of detail all the way down to little pieces on the armor. The environments are toned down quite a bit. While the character models have a lot of details, the environments mostly don't. They look really, I don't want to say washed out, but they just look really toned down, especially compared to the character models. Now, this was on purpose, which I'll explain to you in just a second. With performance, load times are really fast. Almost every battle only takes about 2 or 3 seconds to load before you can dive in and start the mission. And performance also stays really good. For almost the entire game, it stays at a steady 30 frames per second. The only time I've ever seen it drop down below that was during the transformation's ultimate attack. Everything else runs great. Now, this is where the toned down environments come in. I think that Omega Force toned down the environments on purpose so that the performance would be better. Because a lot of Omega Force's Vita Muso games have been really choppy as far as frame rate is concerned. This game isn't. So, washed down environments, better performance. It's still an annoyance, but you can tell they had reason for it. Berserk and the Band of the Hawk is an action game packed full of Berserk story characters and content in general. While some missions do have objectives that feel repetitive and the environment graphics are really toned down, it's one of the best Musou games I've played in recent years, and it's really made me a big Berserk fan. For fans of the series or fans of the Musou genre, it's definitely something you should pick up. Reviews to Go rates Berserk and the Band of the Hawk an 8 out of 10. If you have any questions, feel free to post them below, or you can head to my website at www.reviewstogo.com.